Hello and welcome to Disenthrall. Today we bring you Travis Hallman to talk about his questions on Anarchy. Travis Hallman is the lead administrator for the Ask a Libertarian Facebook team, whose mission is spreading awareness of libertarianism and informing non-libertarians, while empowering those who support liberty on a daily basis. Travis Hallman's favorite quote is, "If your only tool is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail," by Abraham Maslow. Travis Hallman is a libertarian because he cares equally for the low class, mid class, and high class, the minorities and the majorities, the fortunate and the unfortunate. Thank you for joining us today for a conversation. Travis, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mr. Smith.
You're so formal. If you could, just tell us a little bit more about yourself, a little bit more about Ask a Libertarian and what all you do with them.
Great. So my name is Travis Hallman. I am the lead administrator for the Ask a Libertarian Facebook team. Originally, the page started in August of 2016 by a man named Mr. John Keck. John Keck and Mr. Stephen Bernays co-founded the page as Debate a Gary Johnson supporter during the 2016 election. After the 2016 election, we decided as leaders of the team to change the name to Ask a Libertarian, a more broad term representing a more broad group of people, not just a specific individual. So we decided that it would be best to have a team of people because there was many operations, many functions of the page that needed to be operated. So now we have collected over 50 members from across the world. A couple of them are outside of the United States. We have multiple departments, up to 11 departments. 4 of them work together to create content. Actually, 5 of them, sorry. One of them is a journalism department. The other is an acting department. Another is a multimedia department. And another is the, it slipped my mind. Journalism, acting, music, and graphics, and public AMAs is the last one. We were very grateful to very recently have Mr. Patrick Smith on our show with a public AMA where anybody could tune in at any during the event and ask any question that came to their mind. And it was very inspiring. There was a lot of really good questions and a lot of really good answers that were given. So inspiring that we stayed in touch, and we have created another opportunity for us to strengthen liberty, inform non-libertarians, and empower those who do support liberty by having this function today. That would be myself.
Awesome. Yeah, so part of my activism, as longtime viewers would know, has been recently, over the past 6 months, moving into the political sphere, because there's a lot of people that pay attention to politics because it has control over their lives. And so if I can sort of slide in front of all those people paying attention to the silly game and sort of use it as a platform to speak a little bit of truth to people, then I'm going to try it. And at the Ask a Libertarian platform, we had a pretty cool AMA talk, and I appreciate them for having me on. Yeah, and as you said, that kind of struck up a conversation between us on anarchy, voluntarism, which I would call the logical conclusion of libertarian principle and thought. And I wanted this time together today to just be sort of an informal discussion where you're curious about how things could work and would work and wouldn't work and might work, and what may or may not be scary or may or may not work or function as well. And I don't think there's enough of those conversations online, because a lot of people have the same questions. When I talk to this person and that person and that person, they all pretty much ask the same things. So if we can have one of these conversations live for everyone, maybe we can answer everyone's questions at once. I think this is going to be fun, and I'm excited and looking forward to it. So I'm going to kind of like let you drive the show, though, because this is your conversation. I'm just sort of here to answer questions and to kind of ask questions back at you to make you maybe think about a few things. So take it away, Travis.
Great. This is awesome. It's a great experience because I love asking questions, and I also love receiving questions. However, I try to answer questions by asking more questions, using the Socratic method, being that Socrates taught his students simply by asking questions to prove the fallacies within their own perspectives. So asking questions would be my forte. I would like to give you my thought regarding what you said about having a platform. You engaged into politics so that you could have a larger audience because people listen to politicians. And you reminded me of what Ross Perot said in the 1992 debate. where he was asked, I believe it was either about abortion or drugs. I'm quite sure it was abortion, though. And I believe he said he didn't really want the government involved, but he would use his platform as president as a bully pulpit and would preach the ideas that he wanted the culture to embrace, but not use government to enforce them. And now Ross Perot was not a libertarian by a long shot, but just like any other party, they have some good things about them. And the Libertarian Party is just what embraces those good qualities in other candidates, which I believe is something that Gary Johnson said during the 2016 presidential debate. So I kind of just want to commend you for that. And I think that's awesome. Now to continue into the discussion, I'd like to preface by pointing out that this is simply a discussion. It was emphasized that we will be conversing with each other. So I really haven't planned out any lengthy scripts or anything too detailed in that regard. But I do have quite a few questions that get brought up whenever I'm defending anarchism to another person, and questions that I have thought just in my own spare time. But before I ask a question, I would like to preface the first section of questions. There's 3 sections of questions. It'd be great if we can get to all of them today. If not, that's okay. I'll preface the first section of questions with telling you how my day has gone so far today, to express that I've had somewhat of a random day. It started off very normal, doing work online for the Ask a Libertarian page, but then I had time to kill, so I searched on YouTube how to make jelly beans. They're just a bunch of different sugars and different types of corn syrup to powdered sugar to concentrated sugar, and just a bunch of different flavors and sugars. And it's something that's really interesting, but very, very random. And I also challenge my mind politically to think of things that may be very, very random. So this first section could be categorized as miscellaneous. So, Mr. Smith, once elected not governor of Texas, would you fear assassination?
That's a great opener. Yeah. Yeah. So my strategy has recently changed after my conversation with Larkin Rose. I don't know if you saw that. And after watching his debate with Adam Kokesh. Previously, I'd kind of followed the Kokeshian plan of, if I'm elected not president, I'm going to march to the White House after being sworn in and sign an executive order freeing the people and peacefully dissolving the federal government. Larkin's criticism of that was that you are using the libertarian platform to tell people that the way to achieve freedom is to vote for somebody to ride in on a white horse and with the power of executive order free everyone. But the reality is, and the true principled libertarian message is, the entire voting process is invalid. The system of government control is immoral and invalid and dumb, and should not be endorsed as the vehicle to achieve freedom because it's non-consensual. That makes it invalid. So, in light of that, I recently changed my strategy to I'm just carrying a message. I should say we, it's not just me. I drafted it and we're going to work on it as we go forward. A Declaration of Individual Independence, which is a much more libertarian plan. Everyone that wants to can participate. They can sign this Declaration of Individual Independence, and my role will simply be to amplify the message of that declaration to the world. If I win, it will be a triumph of that message of a bunch of people saying that they withdraw their consent to be governed, and they're going to be doing that not because Patrick Smith rode in on a white horse and signed an executive order doing that. It's just a simple statement of fact in the world. They withdraw their consent, and I'm going to show that to the world. And it's not about me. It has nothing to do with me. I'm not saving or freeing anyone. I'm carrying a message of their withdrawal of consent, because that's what it takes. The only thing it takes to be free, the only thing it should take to be free, is a personal decision between your own 2 ears. I, Patrick Smith, withdraw my consent to be governed. And the moment I do that, all forms of non-consensual control over my life become invalid and immoral. And so that's the message I'm spreading. Sorry, I kind of went off topic there. But yeah, that's what I would say to that.
So I think that's a great answer. It actually slightly in its own way reminds me of Martin Luther King Jr. because he had an audience. He had a lot of people looking at him. And with you having that individual Declaration of Independence, having collected multiple signatures would put an audience of eyes on you. And back to the question, if there ever was a point in time that you were assassinated for your leadership skills of liberty, then you would have an audience of people to record that and to carry that message on to the next generation and following generations. So that's a great answer. I appreciate your answer.
Well, of course it's a possibility. Anytime you resist structures of power, the structure of power is going to resist back. And of course that might make me a target. I have a limited time to exist in this universe, and I can use that time for just personal narcissistic pleasure, or I can try and make the universe a slightly better place for my children. And I've chosen to do that, to try and make it as good of a place to live as I possibly can before I hand it over to them, so to speak.
I think that's amazing. You just reminded me of Will Coley. Mr. Will Coley was a vice presidential candidate for he was seeking the nomination from the Libertarian Party to be the candidate for vice president. That was a mouthful of words. I'm sorry. But he got really excited at one point, and he was during the debate, and he was saying, "Hey, I know people that's been injured and even died standing up for freedom in their own lives and been incarcerated," and gave examples. And then he said, "I will fight for your liberty. I will die for your liberty." And I just thought that was really impacting because his heart, his neck, and everything would be willing to be put on the line for our freedom. I don't want to change the topic before I just, give you another moment to add any other thoughts to it. But I do have another question for you.
No, go for it.
Okay, great. This is, I feel the need to remind everybody that this is in the miscellaneous category. So the date is November 7th of 2018. And you've been elected not governor of Texas without any resistance from the state. Coincidentally, China successfully created the world's first time machine, and the oil companies in Texas are wanting it so they can use their advanced technology to drill oil from the past. Would a Patrick Smith not governorship prohibit the oil companies from purchasing a time machine? If so, how and why? If not, why?
This is a very interesting question. So there's a lot rolled into the very beginning of that premise, right? If Patrick Smith is elected not governor of Texas, it means that the majority of the political will has undergone a radical sea change to now believe that they should be free of non-consensual governmental control. At which point the Texas government would cease to hold sway over their lives, as would the federal government. And of course, Patrick Smith has no power to control what people do. It's all to voluntary association and the free market. So that, I think, is the basic answer to your question. If Patrick Smith wins, everyone's free, and Patrick Smith doesn't have power to control time machines and their usage.
I recall watching one of your prior episodes that you had looked like a skull, and you would present it and say, "This is devil's advocate."
Yes.
Okay, great. Can we pretend that I'm holding the skull?
Sure.
And now suddenly I'm just a statist. It's very temporary, but so in this regard, you would allow for an. Oh, okay.
No, you're good.
Yeah, you can hold it on my behalf.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. So in this scenario, you would allow for the malevolent oil companies to travel and deplete the resources from prior years, prior decades, prior centuries, and then leave us with, theoretically, we would have everything, but we wouldn't be at this point because we wouldn't need these resources anymore because people have gone without them for so many years that time evolved to create new technologies. So it's a little bit of a straw diagram figuring out which way the time travel would go. But ultimately, from a statist position, you would allow for them to travel freely through the dimension of time?
So, assuming time travel exists, that doesn't change ethics. Ethics are universal. They apply equally to all people in all times and spaces. So if I'm able to go back in time and steal resources, then I'm committing theft. I'm aggressing against the people to do so, and the world will know about it. Adding time travel to the universe does not grant Patrick Smith new powers he didn't have before to regulate and control people.
Wow. Wow. I'm really grateful that I asked this question, because it really exemplifies how closely you hold ethics to your political views. That even that I realize that as a libertarian, we support our natural rights to travel. We think about traveling on a flat surface like a road, or walking on a sidewalk, or through the air. But we don't typically think about traveling through another dimension, because it doesn't exist in a way that we can travel through it in a different way yet. So, that avenue being time, and even if it's such an abstract sci-fi like form of travel, you would still hold your ethics closely, and not only the ethic of freedom of travel, but also the act against aggression. So if someone did aggressively steal, even if it was from the past, there would still be repercussions in the present time. So I guess that kind of actually drives it.
Well,
go ahead.
That's how you extract the principle behind a scenario somebody gives you. What is the rule that you're testing in this situation? Does ethics apply across time as well as across space? And if I were to say, oh no, well that's not okay, we get to stop those people from traveling through time for the purposes of theft, that means that time is not a factor. That makes ethics non-universal across time, which means that there's some really dangerous implications for right and wrong based on, okay, well, is it right today? Will murder be wrong tomorrow? Are we sure? If I think someone is going to commit a crime 3 years from now, can I attack them today because this ethics doesn't really take into account time anymore? So consistency is key to everything.
And I love consistency. I think I've heard you preach about that in a few different videos. Whenever I study philosophy, and I've studied many different philosophies, not just political ideas, I look for consistency. And where I see the most consistency, I find the most purpose, just the most, the best concepts, the most applicable concepts. So I'm going to take a minarchist position now, as far as how would the oil company, the CEO, whoever is deciding they're going to travel through time to steal resources from the past, in a minarchist society, there's law enforcement, there's judges, there's military. So a minarchist could say that our state would incarcerate or punish those people accordingly. But how would those people be justly punished in an anarchist society? Emphasis on justly.
I don't think you need the time travel device to illustrate the point for that one. It could just be what's to stop in a free society, what's to stop an oil company from going and taking over the oil fields of some other private property owner. I don't think the time component is necessary. Unless I'm missing something, let me know. The way companies work, and I've been at the executive level of companies competing in business in the free market. When your company reaches a certain size, to get investors, to have other people take you seriously as a enterprise, you have to form structures of management that meet certain standards, such as a board of directors. If you don't have these structures of management, if you're just basically a lone wolf CEO owner that does whatever he wants, you're going to find it very difficult to work in the market, to function in the market. The reason why is because these structures of hierarchical control and regulation serve to make the business more stable and more valuable over the long term. If you're wanting people to buy your stock, let's say, and you don't have a good solid management structure in place with oversight of each other and cross-checking and bringing in experts and asking them to join your board of directors to advise on issues X, Y, and Z, then you're going to have a much harder time getting investment and a much harder time convincing people to partner with you in whatever kind of joint ventures you might be involved in. So based on that, it's definitely in my opinion, absolutely certain that in a free market, in a free society without coercive forms of government, you're still going to have these management structures. If you have a large company, you're going to have a board of directors. The CEO making these decisions is going to answer to this board of directors exactly like they do now. This means that that's how the feedback comes from the market to these companies. If a CEO, let's say he decides to form his own private army and go try and raid somebody else's oil fields, the public ill will that will generate will scare the hell out of the board of directors. Investors will start running for the exits. Their company's value starts tanking. Board of directors comes in and puts a stop to it immediately. They call an emergency session and tell the CEO, I don't know what the hell's wrong with you, but you can't do this. We're not an army. We can't go and rob a bunch of people's oil fields just to get a bigger monopoly on the price of oil. People will stop buying from us. We'll go out of business tomorrow. You're fired. We're going to get a new guy in charge. That's the free market. That's free association working. And doing that across the time dimension is not going to make much difference either, because people are going to know what happened.
Great. I think that was a very astute answer given to a sci-fi question. So your answer actually reminded me of a communist, Stalin.
No.
He.
I never want anybody to say that to me. Sorry, go ahead.
when you were talking about the oil fields, the CEO and the board of directors of oil companies being malevolent and possibly attacking another oil field to steal their products, it reminded me of Stalin, because that's what he did in Ukraine, where he. I believe it's called the Holodomor, where he basically put a tax on Ukraine's peoples for their food, and then that tax wasn't enough to feed the Russians, so they started taxing more and more until eventually it was 100% tax on everything. But the reason it actually reminded me of what you were saying, reminded me of that, is because it was kept a secret from the entire world for over 70 years, maybe 100 years. It happened in the 20s, I believe, and we just found out about 20 years ago. So I guess the question in response to that would be, would there ever be, in a free society, would there ever be an oil company that would be bold enough to make those steps and in the attempt to keep it a secret?
There's so many factors that are hard to predict. So first of all, whoever owns the oil fields in the first place, it will have a defense force, likely covered by an insurance company that keeps it well funded and well protected. Second of all, any competitors to the attacking oil field company would love for them to try and capture their these people's oil fields, because they would immediately go on a marketing blitz, running commercials. Evil Oil Corp is trying to attack, innocent people to steal their oil to get a monopoly on the market. Stop using Evil Corp's fuel now. That would be like, it would be handing them marketing candy. In a free society, unlike the government scenario, you're not keeping this stuff secret, because they're obviously capturing resources. People would know that happened. And there is no system of control in place to allow this stuff to happen, even though people know it's happening. And there's no system of control in place to keep the information quiet.
Absolutely. The system that we have now isn't working. I think I would agree with Ron Paul. I'm not so sure if Ron Paul is actually an anarchist, because I've heard him saying things about government intervention in abortions. But he's very well respected, and he said that he doesn't. He said that when he compares the idea of having no government to the idea of us having the government we have now, we would be exponentially better off without any government than what we have now. I don't want to. I'm really glad that this somewhat silly of a sci-fi question turned into a very thorough discussion. So yeah, I'm very grateful for that. I don't want to end the discussion without giving you an opportunity to add anything to it that you would like to add, though. Is there anything that you would like to add to this thought?
No. I appreciate edge cases, because they serve to clarify ethics. So You will not see me shying away from any of them. Bring it on.
Great. So if I can take the questions to a very far boundary and you can maintain the same ethics, then that just proves consistency. And with consistency comes legitimacy of a philosophy. So the next question, it's about zip codes, but I would really like for zip codes to represent a metaphor for just all business transactions across our country.
Okay.
So here's the question. How would zip codes maintain order in Texas with the remainder of the country if all the government in Texas is abolished with your not governorship? Does the question make sense? How would like postal services maintain being organized whenever shipping from one side to another country or another area that doesn't have a government?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Would there be complications?
There are systems of organization imposed on us that are nonetheless useful. Everybody in the country, well, almost everybody in the country has a social security number. That's a mostly unique identifier that can be used in databases across the world to associate information with somebody. Driver's license number, same thing. Zip code, address. These are all useful data points that can be used to provide services to people. There are also plenty of non-coercive examples of the same types of organization in the free market through cooperation. For example, telephone numbers, area codes. That's just a bunch of phone companies agreeing to use the same number for each house or each phone connection. IP addresses on the internet are another perfect example of that. Everybody that's on the internet worldwide are certainly under no coercive system that requires them to use the same IPv4 addressing system, which everybody on the internet has a unique IP address. So if I want to talk to somebody across the world, I'm speaking the same language and talking to the same address because all the private companies involved, and there are a lot of them in between me and somebody on the other side of the world, they've all agreed to use the same communication platform, the same metric or the same identifier for each person on the network. There are tons of these, and I call it cooperation because you have competitors, but they realize that to serve their customers better or best, they do have to cooperate with each other in some ways. Again, mobile phones are an excellent example. Like in the very beginning, there was, you could send unlimited text messages to other AT&T customers if you were an AT&T customer, but to text another company's customer, there were fees, a lot of fees involved. Well, the market said, no, that's dumb. We want to text everyone. And so the phone companies had to create new infrastructure and interoperate with one another to allow you, when you send a text message on AT&T, to transmit across competitive boundaries to reach the other company's customers. So these are just some examples of, I think, the utility that zip codes provide in a free market.
I think that's a great point of reference, using the phone companies and IP addresses because it creates a parallel. And if we can use that perspective and apply it to postal services or zip codes as well, then it creates more legitimacy within the philosophy because it's more consistent. So yeah, I think that's a very insightful answer. And you actually answered the next question that I had for you. It was about social security numbers and how...
I used my time machine to see that question ahead of time. And so, yeah, that's how I knew I was going. Just kidding. Sorry.
Priceless.
Go ahead.
That's perfect. I love it. So I need to make sure I phrase my questions correctly, because I remember you mentioning the Declaration of Individual Independence. Are you still running to receive the LP nomination to run for governor?
Yes.
Of Texas?
Yeah, and I can talk about that a little bit or a lot, depending on how much you want to hear.
I think you will get a lot of opportunity when we go to the next section about agorism versus partyarchy.
Okay.
I'm just going to ask like a couple more quick questions in the miscellaneous tab, and then continue. So once elected and the government is abolished, then what would a resident of Texas hear if they dial 911?
Is 911 a useful service to you?
The times that I've needed it, I really needed it.
So it's something that you're going to want. So I think we could agree that there's a market demand for an emergency number you can call on your phone to have people come to protect you, or at least to clean up the mess after it's over, which is how 911 usually works, right? It's the cops arrive after everything's over to help out, or to report a crime or things like that. Anywhere there's a market demand.
One of the biggest.
Go ahead. No, please go ahead.
One of the biggest responses, or the most common responses I hear whenever I'm talking about anarchism regarding law enforcement and military and judges, is the time, the transition, the phase. So a lot of people say, well, I can support anarchism, but it couldn't be immediate. There would need to be a pragmatic residual, or a pragmatic slow dissolvement of the government. So the question to be asked would be, would there be an in-between period between you being elected and allowing private organizations to replace those government operations? Would there be a time period at which, if someone called 911, they would hear nothing?
So the transition is something that cannot be predicted. The ethical position, the only moral position to take, is end consent violations now. And that is my only position, and will only ever be my position. To say that, oh, we want to ease the transition incrementally, is just another way of saying, I want to violate people's consent on a gradient time scale between now and a month from now, or 3 months from now, or 5 years from now, or whatever your transition period of preference is. That is equally immoral to saying, for the purposes of keeping people safe, I'm going to violate your consent every day from now on. It's the same argument with just a small time variable changed. I would never support any violations of consent. From the moment I would win, people's consent becomes sacrosanct. That means coercive taxation ends day one immediately, because that's what I'm doing. I'm bringing that message of non-consent, to be governed, to be taxed, to be controlled anymore, day one, immediately. That's how ethics work. It's on or off. It's not a gradient of maybes along the way. In fact, that's a great way to lose if you listen to Rothbard. Does that answer that question, or did you have something you wanted me to expand on? Oh, yeah. So,
no,
yeah, sorry, I didn't actually answer the question. So on day one, if somebody dials 911, what happens? Well, in day one, if a water company for your local municipal water supply company realizes that they can no longer coercively maintain their customer base, they still have a massive amount of equipment under their control. They still have a big group of employees, all with the skills necessary for delivering water. They just lose their ability to take tax money to get a paycheck every day. So they have an immediate, strong market motivation to get their butts out and go door to door if necessary to restore their customer base. Except now it would be voluntary, and they would be asking people to give them their service. They could do that day one. Day one, they stop getting an automatic forced paycheck. They better get out there and start selling pretty quick if they want to, keep paying their bills a month or two later. I don't think that it would take very long at all for these people to restore, because there's a demand for these services. Otherwise, they wouldn't exist in a democracy. If most of the people didn't want water service, if most of the people didn't want 911 service and protection, then it wouldn't exist in a democracy, right? As long as the government exists through the consent of the people. So you're going to have a lot of police with a lot of training on how to protect people. I'm not going to agree that maybe they're good at it in the way that they would have to be in a free market, but you're going to have a large labor pool with skills and training and a love, at least, for that line of work that are going to want paychecks. Well, they better figure a way real quick on how to properly satisfy a market demand that they haven't had to worry about before. Hey, do you want, a great example would be like insurance companies. I think insurance companies and dispute resolution organizations would probably play a much larger role in a free society. So if you want an insurance policy, like a self-protection insurance policy, one of the things that's definitely going to come with that is an emergency number you can call where people with training would respond very quickly. So I think the market demand, being as high as it would be for these things, would impel people to very quickly reorganize their structures that used to be based on coercive free money into, hey, please let me serve you now for a low fee of $29.95 a month. We'll respond to your 911 calls, or whatever it ends up, what the price ends up being as part of your insurance policy or something like that. Does that help?
Absolutely. Your answer reminds me of a quote. I'm 90% sure Larry Sharp said it. He was asked the question, but who will build the roads? And he said, the same people that are building the roads now. And whenever I analyze your answer and the things I've heard in my research of who would build the roads, who would offer the services that government isn't offering anymore, such as law enforcement and judges and things of that nature. I'm sorry, I was getting to a question with that.
It's just fun to think about.
Here was the question.
Okay, go ahead. I just had like a fun thought.
Okay, sorry.
Go ahead.
So I'm slightly familiar with the Libertarian Pragmatic Caucus, which what they would do is they would slowly edge people off the government, slowly remove the government to eventually a libertarian society. But the question is there an opposite libertarian caucus that would do it more quickly? And if so, what would be the name of that caucus?
The Mises Caucus. They seem to be the Libertarian Caucus in the Libertarian Party, as far as I can tell. Yeah, that would be my. The cool thing I was thinking of was just like, imagine sitting in your house, day 2 after the government is abolished and you're free, and your doorbell rings, and the chief of police is going door to door saying, "Hey, we've lost our income. Would you please sign up with our new safety protection service? We're going to, agree to provide these services. We're going to agree to try and protect you from these things. And we also agree that, we're going to stop abusing you for victimless crimes like stop signs and vegetation in your pocket. Please, sir, please sign up with our service." First of all, I would slam the door in his face, tell him to get the F off my property. But, but like then like 10 minutes later, your doorbell rings again, and it's the dudes from the water company. And 10 minutes later, it's the dude from the roads in the local area. Like, it would just imagine the first week of being free. All the people, all the services that you've been forced to fund the entire time, you would finally be in control, and you'd finally have that power, and they would be coming and begging you for your money instead of just depending on guns to take it from you. Oh God, it would be so cool. I just got excited.
People would no longer be deciding the direction of our country through a vote. They would be deciding the direction of our country through their dollars by answering those door knocks whenever people asked for money to fund law enforcement. You reminded me of a quote by Mr. Darryl Perry, who ran for president in 2016, seeking the Libertarian Party's nomination. He said, he was actually discussing the military, United States military, and he said they should only be funded through donations and bake sales.
That's awesome.
I thought it was, it was a good one. So I don't want to end this question, this topic before I give you an opportunity to add any. Okay, cool. So I'd like to present a question that our team was asked in the earlier phases of developing. We were Debate a Gary Johnson supporter Facebook page, and then after the election, we transitioned to Ask a Libertarian Facebook page, which gave a more broad audience appeal for us. And one of the questions that we were asked was perfect for this miscellaneous category. It was it was slightly disturbing, just to be honest. One of the people asked, would necrophilia be legal in a libertarian society? So I would just like to forward this question to you in an anarchist society. And what we couldn't just simply say yes or no. We had to offer a rationale explanation for why we supported what we supported. So in my humble curiosity, what would have you responded to our fan?
Okay. So there are all sorts of behaviors that some people find distasteful. So there's multiple parts to this answer, probably. The first part is that in a free society, people are going to organize with communities of like mind. And those communities are going to voluntarily agree to behave by certain behavioral standards. So if you're in a community that abhors necrophilia and you've agreed voluntarily to live in that community, and then you transgress that particular thing, then you're going to suffer whatever consequences you agreed to suffer when you chose to move into that community and abide by those rules. That's kind of phase one. So phase two would be, or answer, maybe another part two of the answer, if we just want to put aside the practical, like what would happen in society and communities organizing thing, and we just want to talk about the ethics. What is the ethics of such an act? All rights are property rights. And so the thing that makes it immoral for you, well, let's not use me as an example because that makes the conversation intimate. So the thing that makes person A unable to ethically force themselves on person B's body while they're alive is because person B has ownership of that property. They have ownership of that body. Ownership, the coolest way to explain ownership, in my opinion, is it is the right to exclude others from the use of that thing. Like, that is the shortest, most condensed, what is property, what is a property right answer I've ever heard. So person B has the right to exclude others from the use of that property. So person A, that means rape is immoral because person B doesn't consent. If person B ceases to exist, it's still a piece of property. Who owns it? I would say that most likely all property generally by default is understood to fall to, the family of the deceased. And so I would also assume that the family of the deceased would disallow people from using that property in any nefarious ways that they wanted. Therefore, it would still be just as much a violation of property rights as it would have been when the person was still alive. How is that? That was the first time I've ever taken on necrophilia.
I think your answer actually provides for great substance in a very real realm of property rights. And where does that line get drawn, and whose property is whose if the person is deceased? So the next question regarding that would be, if the person is deceased, okay, in an anarchist society, if the person is deceased and let's say, person B is deceased and person A engages sexually with them, which is very disturbing. But at what point would there be a punishment involved? So I think it's a very serious issue because the family members of the deceased person, who would they call for there to be a just punishment for the person that violated the property rights of the deceased person?
So again, this is a practical discussion based on our predictions on how a free society would work. So this is very difficult to do because if you think back to the times of slavery, if I was trying to convince you that slavery was immoral and it should be ended today, and you responded by saying, well, how would the cotton get picked after we free the slaves? You have to explain that to me and prove that it'll work before I agree with you that it's a good thing to do to free the slaves. No, well, let's do the right thing today and free the slaves, and we'll figure out how it'll work when it works. That's kind of the same thing we're doing here. We're just going to try and fun and playtime predict how a free society might work, but I'm not saying that the ethics of it hinge on the practicality of my ability to predict how it's going to work in the future. We have to absolutely end slavery today, and if that means more necrophilia, which I don't think it would, but if that's the outcome until we figure out how to handle that situation, it doesn't matter because it's important that we end slavery today. So that's my preface to that. So practically, how would I predict that might be handled? And again, we don't have to use necrophilia. Sorry, we don't have to use necrophilia. I haven't said that word a lot. Imagine that. We don't have to use that example to illustrate it. It can be any property violation, any trespass. Person A comes on person B's property. I shouldn't say it that way. Person A enters. Person B's for this is a lot of landmines here. So, person A trespasses on person B's property, damages something. How is that going to be handled in a free society? Is just kind of like an equally. It's an equal conversation without the overtones. So, or undertones. Undertaker. Anyway.
So how would you answer that without the undertones?
It's property. So. Anytime someone damages your person or property, you're owed restitution. And that's just a fancy way of saying, that's like a layer on top of a layer on top of a layer of just saying the non-aggression principle. You do not have the right to initiate force on peaceful people unless it's self-defense. Well, that's what the initiation part means. So if somebody initiates force against you, you can certainly respond with force. Why is that? Because all rights are simply a reciprocal understanding between sentient people. And when somebody signals to you with action that they don't respect your property rights, you no longer have a requirement to respect their property rights. So, build on that a couple levels, and now we have a property dispute between somebody that damaged property or trespassed or raped or whatever. They're owed restitution for that crime. That's a fancy way of saying I can now use force against you to make myself whole again or to defend myself. I think in a civilized society, you're not going to have a great demand for vigilante justice being a thing, because that's usually messy. It's usually error-prone. People want a justice system. There's a demand for that now. That's one of the biggest objections I get when I start talking to people about a free society without government. Well, how will we have a justice system? We need that. We can't lose our justice system. There's a demand for that. So that means there's going to be a lot of insanely smart business people competing with each other now to provide the most just, the most respectable, the most affordable, which is something that you don't have now, justice system to resolve property disputes. Your insurance company will likely have a menu for you to select from of which, justice company you want them to, handle your disputes through, as will the attacker's, company will have an agreed justice system, and there will be arbitration, and crimes will get handled, and restitution will be assigned in these ways. Again, it's a consensual system, unlike what we have now.
And just before we continue on, I wanted to do a quick mention for everybody who's watching a live stream, case and video guy here. If you're watching, you'll notice that on the bottom there's a fb.com/disenthrall. If you want to play Stump the Anarchist, you're welcome to do that. If that's all right with you, Travis, I'd love to.
We should make that a thing. We should do a monthly Stump the Anarchist.
Stump the Anarchist. Yeah. So fb.com/disenthrall. That's where I'm moderating the chat. So I see you, Sarcasm and Liberty, and a couple others. So if you have any questions, throw them out there, and I'll maybe interjecting in the next little bit here. So without further ado, back over to you, Mr. Travis.
Yeah, this has been an amazing discussion that it was originally just kind of titled as random or miscellaneous. And I feel like we've had some very substantial topics get brought up for discussion. So I'm actually really grateful that I asked these random questions. I would like to move on to discuss demographics that are primed for liberty, just political freedom, civil freedom, economic freedom, any individual type of freedom or overall types of freedom. So a good question to start off this discussion would be, which demographic of people do you think is most primed for liberty outside of the Libertarian Party? I could give a couple examples if that may help inspire.
I would have to think about that. Yeah, if you want an answer, I would have to think about that. I don't usually think about people in terms of classes or collectivist labels, so I would really have to kind of slow down and think through that before being able to give you an answer.
While you think about it, I was inspired to ask this question because of another anarchist, Mr. Arvind Vohra, and he says, I'm going to do my best to quote all three of them. He says there's three types of libertarians. He says there's the political libertarians that are running for office to make change. There's the individual libertarian that says I'm going to remove myself from any sort of government structure and dismantle the state that way. And then there's the cultural libertarian that that is trying to change the paradigm of our people, our citizens, to not to not salute or not to brag so much on the actions of our government. So I think an example of an individual libertarian could be people engaging in cryptocurrencies. People that want more competition with the Federal Reserve so that their cryptocurrencies can grow in popularity. Another example would be homeschoolers, people that are invested into educating their children, and they don't want competition from a government structured school that's going to put other types of schooling out of business, like private schools. From what I recall, I think I remember reading that you were an unschooler. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit more of what that is and how the ideas of liberty appeal to homeschooling, if not any other demographics that you can think of.
Yeah, I think I now understand what you're asking. So I think if you zoom way out, what should our approach as libertarians, big or small L, whatever you want, what's our sales pitch? Our sales pitch should be something like, hey, oppressed class of person, and oppressed class could be anything from people that want to smoke a plant or people that don't want to be stolen from for rolling by a stop sign. It could be anything like homosexual people, any group of people that has been oppressed by a structure of control. The sales pitch is, hey, oppressed class, we're on your side. We don't think you should be controlled in that way. Why don't you join us? Because we have a bunch of people over here that all agree on one thing. You should be left alone to live your life how you want to live your life. The only thing we ask, the only thing we demand in return is that you also respect other people's right to do that in their own lives. To me, that's an unbeatable sales pitch. You get everything you want. Live your life however you want. Do whatever you want with yourself. As long as it's your own body, as long as you're not violating anyone's consent. The only thing you have to give up is your desire to control others.
That brings me to my next question. Is freedom only necessary for the immoral people because moral people don't break laws, such as pedophiles, drug addicts, corrupt corporation owners, suicidal people, prostitutes? The list goes on and on of what people could deem immoral that is currently illegal.
First of all, I don't know of a single person that doesn't break laws. I think it's impossible to live a life without breaking laws. The system of control is so insane and confusing, and there's so many victimless crimes. I just don't think it's possible. I have men with guns that would put me in a cage right now if they caught me on the street for extremely victimless crimes. I mentioned stop signs a few times. That said, I would shout out to Bastiat in the law. He talks about there being only 3 types of laws. Laws that legalize things that people would have done anyway, so pointless laws. And laws that illegalize things people would have done. And you can break that one down into 2 categories. People that things would have done anyway that hurt someone's person or property, and things would have done anyway that don't hurt people's persons or property. So the 3 types of laws are laws that are pointless, laws that have no victim, which are immoral laws because they exert force on peaceful people that are hurting no one, and laws that hurt people or property, in which case you sort of, in a way, don't really need the law because if it's hurting a person or property, you know it's immoral anyway. So in a way, all laws are either useless, pointless, or immoral.
And that's not for any demographic. That's just for everybody.
Yep.
I like that.
Did that answer the question?
And you actually answered, absolutely. Okay. And you had actually already answered one of the other questions. I was going to ask, what is the best method for libertarians to expose others to our party? One of the things that you reminded me of whenever I'm discussing libertarianism with someone that's unfamiliar with libertarianism, I like to ask them a question. One of the questions I like to ask is a hypothetical question. If you were standing in front of a judge and that judge were convicting you based on today's laws and against every action you've ever done, seen or unseen, would you be a free man, free woman today, or would you be incarcerated because there are too many laws on the books against those the two of those three laws that you would describe, where they're either pointless or they're victimless? So if we can narrow it down, then there wouldn't be there. I feel like that's a big incentive for people to support our party, because we support reducing the overall size of government, and then debating on how small it should be once it gets down to that small, as the Dallas Accord says. So yeah, that was a great answer. I'd like to give you an opportunity to mention anything about demographics primed for liberty before I continue to agorism.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, cool. So this next and last section is about agorism versus partyarchy. From my experience, many libertarians are familiar with the term agorism, but not as many are familiar with the term partyarchy. And I haven't done an official. Yeah. Oh, okay, great. Well, I'm glad I get to reach one more person and the viewers with these words. So I'm going to do my best to put them into my own words. I feel like I'll get really close to accurate. So agorism, I'll start there, since we already know what that, most of us already know what that is a way of dismantling the state. They're both forms of dismantling the state. Agorism is a way of dismantling the state by removing oneself completely from the state, and partyarchy is the end goal is to dismantle the state, but to use the methods of the state to get to that point. So a few characteristics that's common with agorists is civil disobedience, like Martin Luther King Jr. had preached a lot about. Counter-establishment economics, which is basically a fancy name for the black market. Many agorist libertarians will engage in counter-economics so that they're not funding the state through taxes. And then my last part of the description for an agorist would be someone that refrains from voting, because voting is a state construct of itself, and to engage in voting is to engage in state operations, which would be against their ethics. So, and then partyarchy would basically be this people that support partyarchy support dismantling the state by voting libertarian politicians in office to dismantle the state for them. So that's how I would describe the two. But I would like to break them down into three different sections: the civil disobedience, counter-establishment economics, and voting. So to begin the discussion, have you ever engaged in civil disobedience?
Yes, actually. I don't know if you've seen the recent video. We've done it twice now. Actually, a group has done it about 5 times, but I participated in the last 2. It is illegal in Dallas, Texas, to feed the homeless without a license. And so maybe we can pull up a quick clip from that video. But we literally do exactly that. We all strap on guns and rifles. We march down to downtown Dallas, and we make a big show of feeding the homeless, and we sort of dare anyone to stop us for multiple reasons. I mean, first of all, it's also illegal in Houston, Texas, and there are groups that attempted to do that without guns, hint, hint, and were thrown in prison for trying to feed the homeless without a license. We do it with guns, and we get left alone. I think that's a pretty loud statement on the Second Amendment in and of itself. But absolutely, I participate in civil disobedience. Do you have a quick clip of that?
Pulling it up 1 second.
All right, go ahead. Yeah, so it's a bunch of people. We fed probably 300 people that day, in spite of the law, and everyone was armed, and not a single person was hurt, and we did a lot of good that day. And then we went out later that night and gave tents to the homeless people that were literally sleeping on the concrete. Like, we would walk by, and there are people. Before I did this the first time, I really didn't know. Like, you don't know. I mean, you know that people are homeless and they sleep outside, but you don't internalize, you don't really understand what that means. But there are literal humans literally sleeping on the concrete. And we went out at night in the freezing cold. in temperatures I couldn't even, I really would have before that day thought that you would just die if you attempted that. And we gave them tents for them to sleep in. And yeah, and that was 100% illegal, and we 100%, you know, ethics are way more important than the law.
Is this the video? Is it ready to view?
No, I was just.
Was that
I can play the audio, but I was just kind of showing the little clips of, you know, all the stuff that was going on as far as.
We'll link it in the description. Go ahead.
Yeah, we can link it there. But, you know, you got everybody, you know,
great.
There's all this stuff as far as where people are setting up shop and handing out food, all kinds of stuff. There's their music.
Amazing. So a question about that event specifically with you engaging in that form of civil disobedience, would have there ever been a hypothetical line in the sand that if the state passed this certain line, you would have pulled out, said abort mission? If so, what would have that line looked like?
My mission, when you choose to have children, I think your mission in life has to change to be about them. If you're going to create a life, if you're going to put that life into the peril that is existence in the current state of affairs, your mission has to change to try and make the world the best place you possibly can for them. So my line, my last stand would be somewhere around my kids and their safety and their ability to exist. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. Very touching. I wanted to ask that question so that our viewers can hear an idea, like a guideline, that they can see what you're doing and follow your example of where you would draw the line of the state's intrusion and your self-preservation. So the next question regarding civil disobedience, how would you discuss the importance of civil disobedience with a partyarchy libertarian?
Can you give me like a one sentence, what's a partyarchy libertarian? I kind of lost it.
Absolutely. It's okay. So a partyarchy libertarian would support the end result of dismantling the state, but the means of dismantling the state would be through political power, such as voting in libertarians into office and then letting those libertarians sign or not sign legislation that dismantles the state.
I think you first have to acknowledge that there is no mechanism that can be there's no lever that any politician can pull, all the way to the president himself, that would end the state. That lever literally does not exist. The most you could ever get is a reduction in this or a little less of that. And I think if you look at history at all attempts at some kind of incremental reduction in government have been an utter failure. And we can go back to Rothbard. Rothbard did an amazing analysis of the success of the Marxists and socialists over the last 30 years. Who's been more successful, the conservatives or the socialists? I think our society has pretty much in every possible metric moved towards socialism over the past 30 years. And so he examined why that was and the levers that they're trying to pull. And it has nothing really to do with winning office and pulling levers. It has everything to do with standing on what they consider their principle. You know, you have the right. They don't say, you know, elect so and so we can go in and give us free medical care. They say you have the right to medical care, and anybody that tells you you don't have that right is evil. They speak the language of ethics and principle, and then people follow that. And I think that's what libertarians need to do a lot more of, because like this was the problem. This is the problem with Kokesh's campaign, and the same problem with mine before I changed to the Declaration of Individual Independence. As libertarians, we should not be telling people that the way to achieve freedom is to vote. Voting is a meaningless, immoral, invalid process to decide who controls you. Because it lacks consent. Whether or not you vote, the system will control you. That means it lacks consent. That makes voting, you know, at best, like just like sullying yourself by playing an immoral game. And if you believe in if you agree with Mises and with the most basic libertarian idea that you are responsible for the effects of your actions, you own your body, and the things that you use your resources to achieve, you also own. You own the effects of your actions. If you choose to take positive action in the world in the form of a vote, if you choose to use your human action to assist a politician in winning power over other people, invalid power, but power nonetheless, then you are responsible for the effects of that action, at least to some degree. That makes you culpable for the effects of your vote. And a lot of people call, voting as violence is a dangerous leftist idea, Adam Kokesh. It's just owning the effects of your actions. If you take actions in the world and those actions have effects, real world effects on people's lives, and if those effects are evil, if you're violating people's consent, if the effects of your actions are violating people's consent, you are partially, if not completely, culpable for that crime. So if voting violates people's consent and you took the positive action of voting, you're partially culpable for that as well. So, therefore, who is safe to vote for? I don't know of anyone. I didn't vote on because I was scared. There's no one safe to vote for that won't violate morality. Because if I vote for Trump to keep Hillary out, well, Trump has bombed a lot of children. Well, you know all the stuff he's doing. People are literally culpable for helping that happen. Granted, they're not culpable for helping Hillary's evil happen, but they are culpable for helping Trump's evil from happening. So, is it even possible? Is there even an option to vote for that doesn't make you culpable for some crime? And that's what I'm trying to do with my Not Governor campaign. I'm trying to see if it's even possible to provide people an option that violates no one's consent. Because if you can't find a non-consent violating option, please don't vote. Don't make yourself culpable, co-conspirator to those crimes, especially not while calling yourself a libertarian. That's self-contradictory, or you become a hypocrite. Oh, we believe in not violating anyone's consent, but I'm going to vote for this politician who is actually going to violate a bunch of people's consent. Did that answer your question?
Partially.
Well, ask what I missed, and I'll try again. Sorry.
I'll add a little bit and reiterate. I think everything was great for discussion. So if one of my friends wants a service and I refer a company to do that service for them, then that company does a terrible job. I'm at least partially responsible for referring that company to my friend in the eyes of my friend. So I can understand where you're coming from whenever you say that people that vote for bad politicians that are using force and things of that nature, then they are at least partially responsible. So considering that there is no lever in government to abolish government, then would you say that civil disobedience is pertinent to dismantle the state?
Yeah, I think people have recently said, and you can check out my Larkin interview for a discussion on this. Some people have said, but politics, it is possible to get some measure of freedom using the political process. And they used weed legalization as an example of that. My response was that, no, politics did not grant more weed freedom. It was the mass public ignoring the bad laws, doing it anyway, telling their friends, sharing it with their friends, talking about it, demanding the freedom. And politics followed, because the government has to at least maintain a veneer of consent of the governed. And if they go against the mass will of the people too much, then people start to see behind the curtain. So politics did not provide weed freedom. The people just did it and demanded it and made it happen. And the political ruling class, said, oh, okay, well, we better do this. Just like with alcohol prohibition.
So is there any size of civil disobedience that is not impacting? So I'll give you an example of something I think I understood correctly today. It seems so minute that I couldn't have read it right. But it is, from what I understand, people are marching or walking without shoes on, without flip-flops on. They're doing it barefoot. I think it's called the Barefoot March. And they're doing it because it's a crime to drive a car without sandals or shoes of any form on the feet. The reasoning behind that is because the reasoning behind that is because brake pads, the brake pedal can get really, really hot and cause an accident if you can't press the brakes. That's the statist logic behind that law. So the question is, would that be an example of fighting a law that is so minute that it's a waste of time to engage in that civil disobedience? And if so, how big should someone start? And if not, how little should someone start?
It is a total personal aesthetic preference. There isn't a moral should. So let's leave that alone for right now. It's not like you have a moral obligation to resist. No victim ever has a moral positive obligation to resist. That said, I roll stop signs quite frequently, and I especially like to do it when I have a car full of blue pillars. They're like, "Oh, you just blew through that stop sign." I'm like, "Yeah, there's no one around. There's no victims. It's a dumb law. You know, I shouldn't be attacked for that." If people are getting attacked for not wearing shoes in cars, imagine I mean, that's like a marketing campaign ready to go. Like, want to be safe? Like, the cops will literally, ostensibly, to keep you safe from barefoot driving, they will attack you and rob you for doing that. They're handing us those sales pitches. So is it too small? Like, rolling a stop sign is a great example. Even when there's no one in my car, a lot of times I'll roll a stop sign if there's no one around, because if there's a victim, it actually becomes a crime, right? But if there's no victim, I roll the stop sign. Maybe some neighbor sees it happen. Now, most people would probably be like, lawbreaker, that criminal. I wish there was a cop around, and a lot of people would even call the cops on something like that. But do I think there's anything too small? No, because even if no one sees it, you in your own head are flexing the muscle of I own myself, I own my body, I maintain agency over my property, and I'll use it however I want. And so if not wearing shoes while driving, flexes that muscle, do it, man. Do it.
In the spirit of devil's advocate, wouldn't getting caught by the police engaging in civil disobedience be counterproductive to the agorist movement? Because once a police officer catches someone engaging in civil disobedience, the next step is handcuffs, the next step is court, and the next step is fines. So
or murder,
the person
depending
now
on your level
becomes
of
a criminal.
resistance.
That's true. That's true. But if the person is required to pay fines, then those fines go to the state. So would it be a counterproductive movement to engage in civil disobedience and get caught by the state?
So you briefly said there something that made it sound like the victim was culpable for the money going to the state, which is absolutely not the case. You can never victim blame in that way. An example of that scenario would be if you own a dark alleyway and you have the right to walk down your dark alleyway, it's yours, and you get robbed, and they take your money and go do awful things with it. You're absolutely in no way culpable for the crimes of that thief. Day two. It's still your alley. You still have a right to walk down that alley. It's yours. Same thief shows up, robs you again. You are still not culpable for those crimes because it's your property. You have a right to do that. So if barefoot driving is absolutely something you have a right to do, and that's just another way of saying no one has the right to use force to stop you, then you're never culpable for the crimes of the state when they choose to rob you for that. Now, practically, is it good? Adam Kokesh marched in Washington, D.C. with a shotgun and had his house raided and did a lot of prison time, which removed him from the activist community for quite some time behind that. And during that time, he was pretty much ineffective as an activist. Larkin Rose spent a year in prison for resisting theft in the form of taxes by the government. During that year, he was basically invisible and not really effective as an activist, I would argue. Some people might disagree. So it's a personal decision. How do you want to resist? How much are you willing to risk? Is what you're risking really worth it? Is it practical? What's the most effective way? I think these are really personal case-by-case decisions that you kind of have to make for yourself.
I think this is interesting because this conversation somewhat turned into a class for civil disobedience. We're not necessarily telling people specifically where to disobey and how to disobey, but it's good to have these discussions because people can hear that we are weighing our responsibilities with our possible outcomes and what is important to us. And I think it's good for people to hear that we have inner measuring mechanisms to decide what's best for us and our community and how to engage in civil disobedience most effectively. Before I continue to the next, though, do you have anything else you want to add about civil disobedience?
I would just say, a great thought experiment is always to try out the other extreme. So we're talking about the smallest ways. Is it practical in these tiny ways to be an activist? Well, what are some other extremes? What are the hugest ways you could technically consider, to be being an activist that might be so extreme that they would have instant, devastating repercussions, and would those be practical or worth it? So one extreme example would be consider the ethics of a traffic stop. You have a person using force, threatening you with deadly force if you escalate, to pull you over on the side of the road for a victimless crime. Ethically, are you in the right to use force to defend yourself against that person's initiation upon you? Absolutely. Ethically, you are. How much force can you use? As much as you need to defend your person or property. You know what I mean. You know what I'm saying. Now, is that response, which would certainly make news, likely end up in the immediate ending of your life, if not in the near future, is that activism on that scale effective? I don't think it is. I think it's counter-effective. I think it hurts the cause because the general public, the blue pillars, would see you as an extremist, and you would sully the name, the labels that you carry. Just like with the recent shooting. After every shooting, everybody always goes and digs through them to try and figure out, were they a Democrat, were they a Republican, were they a communist? They always try and figure out what labels they operated under so that they could associate that deed with that label. And so while you would be ethically justified in using deadly force to defend yourself if necessary in a mere traffic stop, I think it would be an absolute bad form of activism. Just an interesting thought for you.
Well, and just before we go on here, while we were talking about how far should you take the idea of driving barefoot, well, I just did a quick little Google search because I've heard about this exact thing before. Did you know that flimsy footwear in the UK causes 1.4 million close calls and accidents each year? So it's actually safer to drive barefoot. So it's actually practically, would you rather get a fine, or practically would you rather have a close call or get into a car wreck because you're using the wrong kind of footwear to drive, right? So that's something to consider as well, because not all of these laws are for your good, but sometimes it's actually to your detriment, right? Like, forcible disarmament, that might be to your detriment if something bad were to happen, right? So I just wanted to throw that out into the space as well.
I'm glad you did. So you were discussing, Mr. Smith, about defending ourselves during a traffic stop and how that would be a very radical form of civil disobedience. And then there's the driving barefoot, which would be a much less radical form of civil disobedience. And it seems like you're saying that you can't go too small, but you can go too big, too radical, that wouldn't help the movement. Is there a way to more definitively draw the line between too big and just big enough? No, where would Goldilocks be?
I don't think that's what I said, and if I did, I said it wrong. I said it's a personal choice, and I have preferences on what I think, and I have predictions on what I think will be the most effective activism and what will be, less effective or disaffective, or opposite of effective. But it's a personal choice. And I will never victim blame. If you go off and defend your life in a traffic stop, I'll be like, well, that cop asked for it. It was a victimless crime. He shouldn't have done that. I will mourn your loss and wish you had done it differently, the same way I mourned Adam Kokesh's abduction and caging for what he did. Would I march in D.C. with a shotgun? No, because my personal judgment on the cost-benefit ratio on that act. You have to look at, okay, what benefit did Adam get out of that activism and a loss of a year of his life? I'm not sure he got enough out of it So me personally, it's a personal judgment call. I probably won't be doing that particular path. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I love that your philosophy of individualism applies in every aspect, every question, every decision that would be made. It's up to the individual for them to judge a cost benefit and to make a decision from there. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to continue to the next question.
Yeah, do it.
Okay. So I asked, have you ever engaged in civil disobedience, being one of the three cornerstones of agorism? The second cornerstone being counter-establishment economics, also known as the black market. Question being, have you ever engaged in counter-establishment economics?
Oh, you can't see the rest of the shirt. Can you see it?
None of your
Who's in your
fucking
wallet?
business. None of your.
Okay.
This is the Monero cryptocurrency logo, by the way. Yes, absolutely I have. And I think it is a form of activism, and I think it is effective. Was that the question? Yeah.
Yeah. It was really a yes or no question, and the idea that you said that you have engaged in cryptocurrencies, that's very counter-establishment economics, because they can't be taxed yet. From what I understand, I think they may be trying to find out new ways to start taxing some of the cryptocurrencies. But so the next question would be, how would you discuss the importance of counter-establishment economics with a partyarchy libertarian? Maybe this could you could discuss how counter-economics and agorism and the counter-economics, civil disobedience, and the refraining from voting can pull that lever that removes the government, that the government doesn't have for us to remove.
I think what we do as activists is, and our only job as activists, and I think this applies to the Libertarian Party as well, I think we are here to change minds. We are here to free minds. We are here to create new free minds. We talk to minds that are, in a cage, that don't see the invisible gun in the room of government, and we tell them about our principles, our ideas, and we show them the power of their consent. And I think that's our only job. And using this terrible, consent-violating, disgusting process called politics should only be thought of as a vehicle to achieve that end of creating more free minds. Another vehicle is participating in counter-economics and, for instance, black market trading, because that contributes to freeing people's minds. When, let's say, a person that I knew needed a kind of medication that the established system would not be easily able to procure for her. Him or her. Damn it, I outed the gender there. And for someone to say, hey, you can get that thing right now without having to beg any centralized structure of power for permission. Just go here and do this in this way, that way, do it, and you can make that happen for yourself. That is one of the most powerful messages to free a mind ever. Oh, there's a way for me to own myself and control myself and do what I want with my own property in a peaceful way. Oh, okay. That makes, and that puts them in that mindset of, oh, the government's out to get me, but I'm not a bad guy. Who's the bad guy now? Oh, the government's the bad guy. It's a very powerful, self-clarifying message. So yeah, that's probably what I would say.
How would our economy be affected, the United States specifically economy be affected, if every American 100% started engaging in international counter-establishment economics? What I mean, for example, is people started going to other countries only to get surgeries outside of our country, and they were taking our Federal Reserve notes to those other countries and giving them to their service providers for those services. How would that affect our currency here and our economy?
You said the word "our" a whole lot of times there. I'm not part of your "our." I am myself. This is not my economy. I share no part in it. I don't really care what the numbers of that group of people's economy looks like. What do I think the effects are going to be? Don't care.
Okay, that's fair. So I'm going to keep it on the same similar topic, but slightly different. So if offered, okay, we're taking in the concept of counter-establishment economics. So if you were offered, would you accept the opportunity to discuss your campaign on PBS being a government-funded TV channel?
I don't think that there's an ethical problem with that, seeing as how I'm stolen from to fund it, so I wouldn't have a problem appearing on it, if that's what you mean.
Okay, so is there any, we talked about the radical side versus not so radical side of civil disobedience. Would you apply the same principles to counter-establishment economics, being that for someone to take a cost-benefit analysis before engaging in counter-establishment economics, or just to engage, just to do it?
Oh, it's personal cost-benefit, because there are some severe repercussions if busted doing that stuff. So yeah, definitely. Cost benefit.
Okay, so
I feel like most of our questions so far have been like helpful questions for the general public, which I think is really good. But I'd also like to hear, like, what prevents Travis personally from embracing voluntarism?
What would prevent a malevolent law enforcement agency from developing in a anarchist free society? And what I'd like to point out, in our large, like America, where we have 50 different states and some of them are bigger than other countries, and there's so many different people, so many different opportunities in our wide melting pot, what would prevent a malevolent law enforcement agency from developing? Malevolent law enforcement monopoly. Sorry, I got my terms mixed up.
No, that's cool. This is a really good question that is very frequently asked. And it's not a short answer, because it's a really complicated thing to try and predict how safety organizations might go rogue in the future. I'd say that standing armies are extremely expensive. The only way in all of history they have really been funded is through coercive taxation. So absent a system of forced extraction of resources, your ability to maintain and use a standing army for any reason would be severely limited. Let's just say you had the ability to do that and weren't checked by any external forces. Second, I would say that one of the main things that people use armies for in the world is to capture tax livestock. Meaning, if I take over country A, I'm doing it for the purposes of capturing any natural resources in the area, but also for taking over the structure of taxation in that area. So if somebody took over the United States federal government, there's already a complete Internal Revenue Service structure of taxation in place. People would just continue showing up to work. Your company would continue extracting income tax out of your paychecks. Life would go on as usual, and the invader would now gain a massive income stream. In a free society, none of that exists. If they want to benefit from a tax stream, they're going to have to go door to door and start threatening people, which would be like infinitely more expensive and would make the cost benefit of that particular economic calculation untenable, right? So that's the second thing I would say. And I got like 50 things I could say, so jump in if you have any comments.
So I would like to ask you a question that was posed to Mr. Kokesh during his debate with Richard Spencer. Did you happen to see that debate?
No.
He was asked, not by Richard Spencer, but actually by a fan that somehow was able to send a question to be asked. The question was, let's presume that America decides to turn anarchist, and there's a bunch of individualists, and there's no collective creating an army through coercive measures, as you were explaining, has always been the case. So now America is anarchist, but another country, for example, maybe China, which has not become anarchist at this point in the story, in the timeline, what would prevent them from just brutally taking us over?
Well, the first thing I'd say is what I just said, where what are they going, what is there to take over? There is no standing system of control and taxation that they would benefit from the great expense of attacking this country, especially considering there's more guns than people here. It would be sort of semi-insane, even for somebody without, like a government is not subject to the free market controls, so they wouldn't have those disincentives to attack people. So if they chose to try and attack a free state or a free area of the world, they wouldn't have the disincentive of sort of capitalism and market forces. But they would have an immense expense that would have a limited benefit because there is no system of taxation for them to capture once they get here in a free society. Second, I would say that when you make defense non-coercive, you open up the genius of the free market to find solutions to that problem, the market problem of, or I would say the market demand of safety. People want to be safe from foreign gangs called countries that want to take them over and extract resources from them. So you would unleash entrepreneurs into the world that would be begging for your money to try their solution at keeping you safe. There's a lot of good ideas. Some of them are crazy. Some of them are not so crazy sounding. I'll go for a normal one, and then I'll talk about a crazy one just to kind of give you the spectrum. The not crazy one would be GoFundMe style defense. North Korea is making threats like they're going to try and take over everyone in this area we call America. Chip in $10 now, or chip in $50 and you'll get the platinum rewards for you'll get your name on one of the bombs that we launch at China for attacking us. You don't. I think in Texas alone, you would raise so much money, you'd have plenty of ability to defend against an aggressive country. And because you wouldn't have to worry about all the bullshit politics, inter-country politics of, oh, if we do this to them, they might respond with, tariffs or, all that's gone. It's just raw, direct defense. You raise money, you spend that money on weapons, you point those weapons at the bad guy and you take them out, let them have their politics. Politics doesn't exist anymore. Just think about that phrase for a second. Wow. So that's probably like the probably realistic answer, or the more, tame answer. The second thing, let's go extreme now. This might not happen. It's kind of scary if it does. But in a free society, there's something called, and you can read about this, Google the term assassination marketplace or assassination politics. Right now, it would only be able to exist on the darknet market, obviously, because if it was a public website, the people would be arrested immediately for even running such a thing. But consider it like a marketplace for bidding on targeted assassinations. You have a really evil despot in China or North Korea or wherever threatening to attack your neighborhood. Your neighborhood says, hey, we don't want to do that. Why don't we all chip in some money on this assassination marketplace to just go and take out the head of that military or the head of that country for daring to threaten us with that kind of force? I think it wouldn't take much money. I don't think the threshold of money that would be required to take out any single human on the planet would be above the reach of a crowdfunding campaign like that. What that would do is make every despot and leader and criminal in the world scared to threaten anybody, which is something we do not have now, really.
And to be clear, you may not want to just Google assassination marketplace.
Yeah,
you might want to load like a Tor browser
probably not.
Or something like that, So just as a public service announcement, so you're not on every government watch list like me and Patrick probably are, Tor is probably something you want to look at. And also, it's interesting because there's all this technology that people say, well, the U.S. government can literally blow people away, with drones and stuff like that. And if that was in the hands of the GoFundMe people or the despot assassination, don't Google that term, that could very quickly reshape the whole face of international politics, right? So, don't Google that.
So just a couple ideas. There's plenty more, and there's ones that aren't as creepy as an assassination political marketplace. But I wanted to give you the spectrum, and that's kind of the best and the worst. So the market will find solutions to this problem. It's a market problem. People have a demand for safety, and there are geniuses that work in the capitalist system to solve people's problems just like that.
I think that was a very thorough answer, something that was very insightful for myself and others as well. I would like to ask you, for myself, I consider myself very intellectual. I'm not intelligent. I've just spent a lot of time researching ideas and considering concepts in my own mind as well. So the challenge, which I think I may have started this interview off with this, I may not, I can't remember. The challenge I gave myself is to project or to defend anarchist ideas whenever I'm discussing politics with people, even though I'm personally more minarchist than anarchist. So that would be my advice if I was talking to someone that was a minarchist that was considering transitioning to supporting to anarchism. What advice would you give to someone like myself that is a minarchist curious about anarchism? And what advice would you give a non-libertarian researching anarchism?
To all my anarcho-curious friends, if you're a minarchist, you already understand that there's right and wrong, and it's wrong to initiate force on peaceful people, especially if you're a libertarian. That is the founding sole principle of everything that you believe as a libertarian. And if it's not, you probably shouldn't be using that label. So the challenge has to go back on you. What do you think is an exception that justifies you attacking me without my consent? There is none is the answer.
I agree. And for myself, I think we've both mentioned a few times that we love consistency. And that's really, to me, what is most appealing about anarchism is that it is most consistent to the non-aggression principle. Whereas if we take its polar opposite, it would be communism. And if I had to choose between one consistent ideology of communism to one consistent ideology of anarchism, I would choose freedom versus not freedom, which is why I'm definitely leaning in that direction. So the
That's
only
good.
And
I want to thank you for that.
I want to emphasize that that I've considered myself to be intellectual, so I've challenged myself to consider the possibilities of anarchism versus minarchism. And logically speaking, in word context, there's really nothing actually holding me back other than a feeling, just an internal urge, like that says it's easier to defend allowing the government to do the three roles of law enforcement, judges, and army. So the question would be, what advice would you give to a minarchist that wants to support anarchism logically, but just doesn't feel like they have that I'm going to use the word boldness, although I'm a very bold person. It's just that extra step. What advice would you give someone like myself?
I would point out, and I've never met a person that would disagree with me when I say that the government is utterly failing at defense. Their budgets are completely absurdly out of control, stupid, insane. They are wasting more money than almost exists on the planet. They are creating as many enemies as they're killing innocent people. They are utterly failing at defense. I drive down the streets. I'm attacked by people that work for the state. I fly. I'm accosted by people calling themselves TSA for my safety that will attack me if I resist. I am not defended. If anything, I am attacked constantly by this state. And even to forget about all the times I'm attacked by the state and just to say, am I defended against external threats? I think they're doing an utterly terrible job at that as well. So first, I don't think I'm getting the defense that people are claiming to need the government to give me. I think, and even if I am, they're doing such a shitty job of it that I no longer consent. I just don't. It's wrong. Stop it. And then the rest is just to basically put your faith in the virtue of the non-aggression principle and right and wrong and the free market. There is no problem in the history of humankind that the free market has been unable to solve.
Your last statement actually reminded me of I'm going to say the spiritual side of me, being that with Christianity, which I am, I love Christ. So there is a little bit of blind faith involved. There is no empirical, indisputable, unquestionable, there is no indubitable evidence that says God is real. There is a little bit of blind faith involved with that. So I saw a parallel there, and maybe I'm wrong, but there's an ounce of blind faith involved with taking that last step to a completely free society, because it's unpredictable. Would you say I analyzed your statement there, that portion of your statement, right?
I would say that there's probably a lot more evidence that the free market can solve any problem than there is that God exists, but there is a certain internal leap. There is an internal barrier to letting go of what you feel is a system of control, even like control of your own life. To a degree, government gives people a feeling that they're in control of their self as well as the environment around them. And letting go of that is scary. And to kind of do a callback to one of your earlier questions that I didn't really answer about unschooling, we as humans accept the reality that we're presented with. When we enter the world, we don't question the stuff around us, at least until we're 6, 7, 8, 10 years old. We don't start really questioning things. We just accept, we internalize whatever's happening to us or around us is normal. And in my home, I run my home. I create an environment in my home to match the way I want the world to work, so that my kids will internalize that. They will accept this reality as the way the world is, so that when they get out of my home and people start using coercive forms of control on them, they will immediately, and it's just clear as day, a beacon will go off saying, that's out of place. They're controlling me against my consent. Stop it. Whereas I think 99% of the world, you're born into a family that's generally coercive. You are punished, you are sometimes hit, spanked, controlled constantly, nannied constantly, watched everywhere you go. Decisions are made for you without your input. And so when those people become adults, they immediately go looking, oh, where's that system of control over me that I've had all my life? I need that. Give that back to me. And I think that is where our internal barrier to freedom comes from. Because we were born, we accepted a world with a system of control over us, a control, like a leveling presence in our life that makes decisions for us, but also kind of regulates things. So we can kind of trust that that's there. And when we hit adulthood, we want that to be there too. And to get rid of that, to give up that, is scary for people like myself that were raised coercively. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, I see a similarity there, or a parallel whenever I was listening with to you, but with Mr. Arvind Bora, where he mentions cultural libertarians and changing the cultural mindset of not needing a mommy and a daddy sort of government. And when we go from our developmental years where we have a literal mommy and or daddy, then we transition into our adult years, and it's going to need a cultural change for people to not. It's going to need a cultural change for people to be more responsible, so they're less dependent upon a government like a daddy or a mommy. I'd like to ask you 4 more questions before we conclude tonight, though, and I think they're going to be questions that you can kind of answer a little bit like concisely.
Okay.
But I'm definitely open to going in more depth. So back to agorism.
And I'm also open to continuing this next week if you want. That's good. I'm enjoying this conversation.
Okay. I am as well. So back to agorism versus partyarchy. Oh, and thank you for the extending the invite too. That slipped my mind. So, have you ever refrained? Okay, voting is one of the three cornerstones of agorism. Have you ever refrained from voting for the reason that voting is a construct of government?
Not for the reason that it's a construct of government, but because I believe it makes you culpable for the effects of your actions.
So, how would you discuss the importance of voting with an agorist?
Is voting important?
Voting for you specifically.
I would ask you if you think voting is important. I think it's a silly, immoral, invalid system of control over people's lives. So would I try and convince you to vote as a voter? Nope. Nope, because my message is the opposite. My message is that the system is invalid and shouldn't be used to achieve freedom. It can't be used to achieve freedom. Now, as an activist, if you want to vote as an activist to help this activist amplify my message, that's a different thing. I would convince you to vote as an activist, not to try and convince you that that's the way you should act to achieve freedom. And I think that should be the libertarian message, actually.
It's beautiful. So is your declaration of individual independence attractive to agorists? How or why not?
It's not done yet, so it really hasn't. I haven't got a lot of reactions to it yet. This is a new plan that's popped up in the last month, so I don't really have data to answer that question yet.
That's very fair. So the last question I would like to ask is, in summary, of agorism being engaging in civil disobedience, counter-establishment economics, and refraining from voting, which one of those three would you say is most impacting to dismantle the state? Civil disobedience, counter-establishment economics, or refraining from voting? Maybe if you could consider the question as if you were giving advice to a new libertarian, what would be the first one of those three steps that you would recommend?
I think the most effective thing you can do is have conversations exactly like this with as many people as you possibly can. Describing the basics of ethics, the non-aggression principle, the simplicity of the golden rule, and how important consent is to right and wrong, and extending this idea of consent to government where it's constantly violated, and then finding out people's areas of disagreement. Like I asked you, what area is remaining in your head that you think it's right to attack me to make happen? And then just calmly and peacefully and with curiosity and empathy and plenty of time and patience and multiple conversations spread out over months if necessary, move that discussion forward, move that mind closer and closer to freedom. Now, actions speak louder than words. So in addition to those conversations, I think resisting immoral laws, counter-economics are great methods of putting actions behind the words, behind these conversations you're having with people. Again, I think as libertarians, we should only be asking people to vote for us if they're already mostly woke and want to do it as an activist, because because actions speak louder than words. If we are acting in a system of trying to get people to vote for us for the purposes of achieving freedom politically, I think that message is counter to our own principles and goals. I think you're sending the opposite message. And so your words have to be so loud to override the hypocrisy of your actions in playing this game. Because like I keep saying this loudly, and I'm doing this on purpose. I am running my campaign for not governor of Texas to not, and that's why I call myself not governor, because it immediately puts me at odds with what everyone thinks of normally when they consider somebody running for governor of Texas. I have no authority, no system of voting, no number of votes can give me any power whatsoever over you. And so I have to say that 50 times as loud because I'm using this process to achieve, as an activist. That's how I would answer that.
It's a beautiful synopsis presentation. I have a lot of questions from the miscellaneous file that I can ask you, but I think we've had a very substantial conversation. I'm very satisfied with it.
I have very much enjoyed our conversation. I will not ask you the question of if I've won you over. I'd like you to please take time, think about it, and then let's maybe pick this up in a week. And if you have any new thoughts or ideas or this conversation that you and I are having is the most powerful form of activism, like I just answered your question. And I think doing this publicly for people with two intelligent individuals that can have a peaceful conversation is really, really useful. This is activism, and I appreciate you for participating in it with me today.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's been a pleasure. We'll stay in touch and see what we can do to strengthen liberty together.
Awesome. Thanks for being on the show, Travis. And thanks to all of you for watching. Thanks to Kaysen for running the board over there and pulling up videos last minute with no notice. I will talk to you guys soon.